Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present here in Kobe. You say that there's not much work on toxic atmosphere. This is what I found, and I want to talk about that too. What might be the reason? First of all, it's clear that toxic. Often young people don't see it like this. They think this word has always existed. They are not aware that this is actually a quite new phenomenon that everybody uses the word toxic. In 2018, this Oxford English Dictionary saw a 45% increase of search hits on the dictionary side, and then toxic became the word of the year. The word itself is not new. It exists since 1600s. Toxicus, it comes from Greek, toxikon. And then is in 1890, and this is interesting, the toxic would also be used as a noun, so that you do not only say as an adjective, this is toxic, but you talk about the toxic. And one could think that this is not necessary because we have already the word toxicity, but it's not entirely the same. Toxicity is a substance that can be found like a chemical substance somewhere, but when I say the toxic, that's a state. It's a psychological state, an ethical state, an aesthetic state. So that makes it different. So it came up in the 80s. There were books on toxic masculinity, toxic parents that became a bestseller. And there must be a reason why this happened in the 80s. So my theory is that in the 80s there was obviously more toxicity or more awareness of toxicity. They discovered how dangerous DDT is. There was more cancer, and the cancer rates had been going up. But then at the same time, there is neoliberalism that enters the political scene. I just changed to so Reagan and Thatcher style neoliberalism puts people under more pressure. There is a new work culture. Maybe under the influence of this environmental toxicity, people started to call that also toxic and said that my workplace is toxic. So because it both happened in the 80s, so that is my idea. And then came the internet. Now with the internet, since the 2000s, that everybody can have the internet at home, there we have communication tools that expose us to aggressive behavior, to inappropriate behavior, and there's a lot of poison coming out of it. There is public shaming in games, there's trolling, there are insults. So all that is a recipe for psychological toxicity. Just at the same time, there was the financial crisis, 2008, where everything fell apart and where you thought that this institutional logic that we still had becomes completely absurd. And I think the taste of the toxic hovers over everything from the 80s to the 2000s, and there it became established. And then on top of it, all this happens in a political landscape that is getting more and more polarized. We have always had extremism, but what is normal today, and that is almost a synonym for toxicity, it's a normalized extremism. When extremism enters institutions and becomes kind of normalized, then the result is toxicity. Trump recently said that about foreigners, he said they are poisoning the blood of our country, they poison our institutions and our prisons. So no matter what he says, but that he uses the word poison is interesting. Then there's another phenomenon. With the internet, we have Me Too, which try to rectify actually poisonous behavior, but with this echo chambering, maybe we also become less tolerant of certain behaviors. And then also one must say, with all these things, maybe we do not have more toxicity. Well, we have, but maybe that's not the only phenomenon. But is diagnosed more often today because people are more aware of it and they see more toxicity, which maybe existed before, but were not aware of it. So we think we have more toxicity, but it's just we are more aware of it than before. Now, this is the background. All this is important for my research, but in reality, I'm interested in something else. Because some people wrote about that, but I have a new angle. It's Burma. I'm glad that you are a student of Burma. He said that in modernity we had form follows function, and we thought that everything that functions well is good just because it's functional. The aesthetics of our environment, the shape, the forms, the colors, all that was acceptable as long as it functioned well, and nobody would ask us how we feel about our environment. Nobody would ask about the atmosphere, and that has changed. So Burma says, since what he calls post-modernity, he says we have a new humanism. That means the way we experience buildings and surroundings, how we feel as visitors who live and as people who live there, comes to the fore. So we are living in a post-functional epoch where objects are no longer defined in terms of their practical functionality only, and not even in terms of their shape or color, but increasingly they are evaluated in terms of the mood that they spread and the feelings that they evoke. So Burma speaks of the transformation of capitalism into an aesthetic economy, and I think one can call it also atmospheric economy. When something is purely functional, we find that today cold, alien, inhumane, whereas before that was cool, that was stylish when it was functional. So, but this is my point. The problem with this new aestheticized, post-functional atmospheric world is that it is not entirely non-functionalist. It is certainly aesthetics, but it still tries to ascribe well-defined functions to the aesthetic environment that it produces. And as this post-functionalist capitalism, what it actually does, it turns the atmosphere into a function. So one reason is that in the new humanist world, the aesthetic and the atmosphere, they are linked to the economy. And in the economy, everything must be functional. So we have an atmospheric economy, and it is not as non-functional as one would think. And I think this foregrounding of the notion of the toxic that we have today, it has to do with these constellations. In this neo-humanist world, one talks a lot about very lofty aesthetic and ethical ideals, but at the same time they are very much down to earth and governed by the economy. So there is always a paradox in atmospheric economies. They are simultaneously idealist and pragmatic. and they produce an aestheticized life world that is kind of dependent on the cynical political-economic reality that it is inscribed in, and that creates toxicity. That is my hypothesis. Because functional atmosphere cultures, they are pragmatic aesthetic phenomena. That means they are somehow toxic by nature. And one would think that atmosphere research would have delved into this earlier, but it doesn't have aroused much interest in academia. I have a little theory about that. One of the reasons might be that the word atmosphere is used in a positive way. When we say there was a kind of atmosphere, well, that means a good atmosphere. But when there was a bad atmosphere, then we could think, okay, when there's a bad atmosphere, then it would actually be better to have no atmosphere. No, but to have no atmosphere, that is very bad. There should be an atmosphere. So this idea that having an atmosphere is something good, maybe that somehow went into the research. So anyway, this is this paradox of this economy of emotions, which follows a humanistic impulse, because it is true that this capitalism, with all the commercials that we have, with this whole culture, new capitalist culture, they believe in positive emotions. They believe in atmospheres. This is very present in our economy today. But then on the other hand, Frederick Jameson, he said already in 1984, he speaks of the waning of affect. He says there is a decline in depth and intensity of emotional experiences in late capitalism, and that's also true. So he says it's because of the commodification, homogenization, and this is also true. So when the humanist economy works in the service of globalized capitalism, toxic atmosphere is the best way to describe it. In the most extreme case, and I have a chapter on this, we will have toxic positivity. Because they are so positive, positivity becomes obligatory, and behind it is the impulse to be more humane, to be better, to be happy, but it becomes toxic because it is dealt with as a function. So, since the 1980s, one has been talking much about the importance of atmospheres, and equally, since the 1980s, there is the rise of the word toxic. There must be a link, a correlation between them. Paul Virilio has said that when you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. So when you invent the atmosphere, you also have problems with the atmosphere. It's inevitable. So we always knew that atmospheres can be manipulated. It has always existed. So as soon as you have atmospheres, there is a danger that somebody is sitting behind it and manipulates it. And in atmosphere economies, that happens very much. This atmosphere manipulation is exalted. And we see that because we are living really in a world of functional atmospheres. So everybody creates atmospheres in marketing. There are positivity coaches. We have urban designers, executive coaches that tell you how to create a positive atmosphere in the company. How there are teaching consultants, how do we create a good atmosphere in the classroom. Political correctness is somehow a branch of that. Always avoid the negative words, avoid words that could hurt somebody, because everything must be positive. We want a positive atmosphere. So it's very good intentions, but it can become toxic. So this is what I find, this is my pattern or my lens. There is a very good example that makes this very clear. This is these home fragrances, the air fresheners, you know that. You put that at home, and you might have seen that if you go to Zara Home, this market has exploded in the last 10 years. It was 7 billion business. They expect it to be 10 billions in 2032. Some business analyst site says that, and he says this trend is particularly strong among millennials, as they placed increased emphasis on household aesthetics and the overall atmosphere. Now, the problem is that these air fresheners are toxic. There are so many chemicals. There is formaldehyde, benzene. There's a long list of chemicals that come out of these air fresheners. So the intention was to manipulate the atmosphere to improve it, but it creates toxicity, and I call this the air freshener paradox. It is something that you can observe everywhere. This happens, and maybe I have time enough to give some more examples. So I said this may be the most interesting point now here. I said when it becomes very extreme, then we have toxic positivity. Now, what does that mean? That's very strange. We want to be positive rather than negative. This shouldn't exist, but it means that even the positive atmosphere can be toxic. And I think that stretches into all kinds of social developments today, that the good smell that you have through the air freshener can be toxic. AC is the same thing. Air conditioning changes the climate, changes the atmosphere inside. It was done so consistently also in the 80s, in the 70s, in the 80s, that they sealed off office buildings, make it completely airtight, because at that time there were still factories next door. Meanwhile, they have been outsourced to China. But at that time, you could still have a chimney next, so you want to seal off everything. But then you have pollution, you have inside pollution, because you also have the fax machine and the photocopy machine, and the air is turning around and people are getting sick. It's called the sick building syndrome. So you have always this air freshener problem. Together with it, you have also, since the 70s, 80s, you have the positivity business. That is not about good air, but about good thinking, the right way of thinking. It's a very humanist thinking. It's also multi-billion-dollar business with publications, conferences, seminars, telling people how to make the environment more positive, concentrating on language and visuality. So the sofa should better be in a bright color, because that makes people happier. On the mugs, you write positive mind, positive vibes, positive life. Now, when it's too flashing and when the smiles are constantly like this, then you think that the positivity has been overdone. And there is this happiness trait that is backed up scientifically by positive psychology, which is quite new, which emerged in the 1990s. And there's also progressive psychotherapy, which has the same ideas. It becomes also very obvious in the wellness business. They want to be clean and open and positive. Focus on nature, because nature is positive. the conventional medicine with the chemicals that is unnatural and that is toxic. So they want to be anti-toxic. But if you Google toxic wellness, there is so much coming up because it fuses with alternative medicine, and then you have far-right conspiracies. So the result again is the contrary of they wanted to have. So when positive thinking becomes obligatory, it becomes toxic because it becomes intrusive. And again, it is part of a society that wants to be functional. Nobody has the right to be unhappy, because if you are unhappy, you are not functional. You are not functioning very well. So this whole self-care, and then now there is digital self-care, they emphasize these ethical obligations, that ethically you are obliged to be well. Everybody must make an effort to be well. So it is inserted into this society of capitalist growth. Enhancement is compulsory everywhere, in work, education, leisure. You always have to bring out your best. So again, this is atmospheric functionalism, which was meant to be an antidote to the burnout society, to anxiety. But when it is driven by these neoliberal performance pressures, then it breeds toxic elements. With all these updates and constant comparisons, it creates anxiety. So there are so many things where we have this air freshener paradox. There is the ranking of universities, or the ranking of everything. Today, well, it was a good idea because you can see where people are. It's not completely random, but it creates anxiety, especially because you know that the ranking is not always correct, that it is more random than we think. People are ranked in Google, but this algorithm-driven culture is toxic by definition, just because people who are toxic, who are aggressive and say spectacular things, that goes up, that gets views, and that goes up. So that creates toxicity. And everybody is concerned by that, not only the people who are the consumers, but also the producer, like Jaron Lanier. You know, he said Trump and Musk, they are Twitter poisoned. They are victims of it. Of course, they poison people with what they post, but they are themselves poisoned. And at the same time, this whole algorithm system that we have is very functional. It is very smooth, very automatic, just because it is so ruthless. But it is this functionalism that creates the toxicity. This is toxic positivity. And then I distinguish it from another thing, and that makes it then more complicated. But it's always good to have something more complicated. That is distinct from positive toxicity. Toxic positivity is positivity that is toxic, but positive toxicity is toxicity that is positive. That also exists. So it is very interesting, because the word toxic, I cannot say this here, but I looked into it for the book. The word toxic is negative. It stays negative. That is different from poison, because the poison can be a medicine. If you don't take too much of it, that means it can be beneficial. The toxic, well, maybe it will not harm you if you don't take very much, but still the toxic remains toxic. It will never be beneficial. It is not ambiguous. Toxic means unambiguously bad, but not all toxicity is experienced as negative. Sometimes the toxic can be experienced as positive. There can even be an eroticism of the toxic, and that I think it launches something completely new. So odors with the perfume. Odors can be used as a sort of pride. You can influence your environment with certain smells that are perhaps not good. There are fashion styles like goth again that emerged in the 80s that look a bit toxic, punk, and you have the pale skin. It evokes the aesthetics of the unhealthy, but there's an eroticism of this toxic, which is strange because it really means unhealthy. Now, one could say this is nothing new because in art, one has always been fascinated by bad things. Art explores decadence, danger, decay, disillusionment. And these things can even create a certain atmospheres, but still something as unambiguously unhealthy, something like the toxic, that is still something new. I think it can exist only in the postmodern age. In 2003, Britney Spears has her song Toxic, in which she sings, "Don't you think you are toxic? And I love what you do." So this is positive toxicity.